If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we conclude the unravelling the mysteries behind the origins, motives and cultures of the 9 major vampiric bloodlines in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Lazarenes, the Harbingers of Skulls. It is strange to think that we reach the end of these little discussions regarding the clans and bloodlines, for it still only seems like yesterday that you were desecrating the bodies of those club-goers as you fed for the first time. Oh, how they grow up so fast. But you still have much to learn before I can get rid of you, and I know that you are desperate for more of my teachings, almost gagging for more of this vampiric lore. But needn't you worry, I do not intend leaving you any time soon. But enough of this sentimental hogwash. You come to me in these peculiar nights to question me of the Lazarenes, who, alongside the Cappadocians, call themselves the Harbingers of Ashur these nights. I know them by the Harbingers of Skulls, who are very different from their parent clan. Most obviously is their clan weakness, which is really an extension of the Cappadocians. A Harbinger's skin maintains a deathly pallor, regardless as to the amount of blood they consume to heal and sustain themselves. Their skin is shrunken, which has this ghastly effect of making them look like corpses, but not to the extent that the Samadi are known for. A Lazarene won't smell like death, only look it. There is a reason as to why I call them Lazarenes, and why they are death incarnate. But to do so, I wish to go over with you their origins, which has us turn once more to the antediluvians of old. Being a bloodline of the Cappadocians, the Harbingers of Skulls share the same antediluvian, which I hope you remember is an individual known as Cappadocius, although some scholars would have you believe that his name is Ashur or Cappadocius. Others even say that Ashur is the name of Cappadocius' sire, although no second-generation Canaanite exists in any myths or records by that name. Most agree that his sire is Irad. That said, I do grow curious about the origins of Ashur, which is certainly more fitting of a name for the time in which he was immortal. Is it an alias that the Canaanite conjured himself? Unlikely, as at no time has anyone heard Cappadocius himself make use of that name. It has always been ascribed to him in writing by others. It is also worth noting that some credit a vampire by the name of Ashur with the creation of the depraved Barley. One could consider the Cappadocians and Barley are cousins of some sort who share the same grandfather. Or do their bonds run closer still? Sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. Now, where was I? Oh yes. In his days as a mortal priest and man of faith, Cappadocius had his own dealings with the dead, as one might expect for a priest. He would converse here and there with spirits of those gone, and no doubt made many an enemy. When the antediluvian died briefly during the embrace, it is said those spirits were waiting for him in the lands beneath, the abyss, the shroud, the void, whatever you wish to call it. They attempted to cling to him, to prevent him from returning to his body when the curse of Cain took hold. It is said that, to some extent, they succeeded, as Cappadocius never returned from the underworld. Well, not fully, at least, for large chunks of his knowledge and self-awareness were lost in that broken embrace, and the Cappadocius who returned was not the one who was kind moments prior. Cappadocius' very soul had been fragmented, and that is why he harbored such a fascination for the dead, or, well, that is at least what they say. Even when himself did not realize it, he was constantly seeking missing portions of himself. It could be for this reason why members of the clan all look like walking corpses, with fresh grave robbers looking just dead at their embrace, perhaps with darkened hair and intense bags around their eyes, only to look more petrified as time marches on. Which would explain the Harbingers of Skulls' appearance, but we will get onto that in a moment. Cappadocius was embraced in the first city by a member of the second generation, presumably Irad, for his intellect and his obsessive interest regarding death, or, more specifically, the point of it. What the reason was, when was the exact moment when the soul would leave the body, and how and what caused the body to die. Was it even the body that died? Was it the heart or mind? He believed that when a person dies, the soul leaves the body, but an echo of the soul remains. This Echo, along with the flesh of the dead, can be manipulated in many ways. He and the rest of the kindred he would embrace would do this through the use of Mortis, a form of blood magic dealing with corpses and their conditions after death. Think of it as a raw prototype of necromancy. Mortis, like the Tremere discipline thaumaturgy, or blood sorcery as the fledglings call it, is separated into different paths and contains rituals. Cappadocius was a very different sort of third-generation Cainite, beyond his infatuation with the afterlife and death preceding it. He would make no effort to partake in the ongoing conflicts that his cousins would partake in. He would study alone for years, before realizing that he would be unable to find the answers to many of his questions by remaining in the second city and on his own. He would often wander and travel the world, embracing a small handful of chowder, including Caius Con, who would later be killed by his brother Lazarus, in addition to Jepheth Cappadocius to rule in his stead as Cappadocius went in and out of torpor, having the wildest of visions through all specs. The antediluvian was a visionary, not a manager. He would make next to no effort in ruling his clan, only asking them to pursue the answers to the question of death. His three chowder would have chowder of their own in positions of power, most notably Lamia, the founder of the bloodline of the same name, few of which were not following the scholarly pursuit of death and following the road of bones or heaven, two of the many paths of enlightenment. Following a vision, Cappadocius would learn of this and become incredibly angry, livid, you might say, like anyone who has woken up hungry, knowing that your children were no longer holy men or women, and that they have been misbehaving. Failing to follow the one task that Cappadocius gave his descendants, he prepared a massive purge of his own clan. He would summon the clan to Kaimalki, an underground mountainous city in Turkey, previously Cappadocia, to ask his descendants had they been studying death and had they been following the road of bones or heaven, amongst other questions, with Jepheth and Caius in attendance. The ones who answered incorrectly were abandoned in the tunnels, while the remainder continued along with Cappadocius. In the end, Cappadocius sealed thousands of vampires in the caves through the means of a powerful ward, making sure that no Cainite would ever leave the city once they've passed through one side. Those who were trapped obviously starved, frenzied, fed, and fell into torpor, and with the added physical resistance of fortitude on their side, you could imagine it taken a tad longer than most kindred to beat each other down. It is a beautifully simple punishment, isn't it? It even had an ingenious name. The Feast of Folly. Delicious. Crass jokes aside, many died. Some, however, would survive and take on a more grotesque and angry visage that would be an extension of the Cappadocians. They would become the Harbingers of Skulls. But you may be wondering as to how these Harbingers are known to us that the Cappadocians were imprisoned in an inescapable mountain. Remember that it was only the Cappadocians that answered Ashur's calling that was questioned, and those who answered what he deemed incorrect were left there. Some refused to answer the calling. Lazarus was one of these chowder, the faithless son of Cappadocius. He took a large chunk of Cappadocians who resisted the summoning to the Feast of Folly to Egypt. These followers of Lazarus would adopt the term Lazarene and assist the followers of Set into their own affairs in exchange for half a millennium's protection. Lazarus was very clear to his followers to never explain how souls of the dead may be summoned or how to enter the underworld, which the Lazarenes occasionally call the shroud. Doing this granted them that much-needed advantage over the ministry. I am told that Lazarus would learn Serpentis from the Setites as well, a useful weapon that he would have used to destroy his siblings and any other agent that was sent to collect him for the feast. Of course, being a Methuselah Cappadocian who would embrace Lamia, his understanding of all specs, fortitude, and whatever necromantic paths and rituals he had at his disposal would probably destroy and withstood anything else in his path with ease. But I digress. Lazarus and the straggling Cappadocians he would find would ask the question of what crime they had committed to surrender their eternal life, a passage bestowed upon them by Cappadocius, often in conflict with his minions, for lack of a better word. The Lazarenes would have a simple goal: to present Ashur the skulls of those he murdered, before shredding his soul as he destroyed theirs. And thus, the Harbingers of Skulls, or Harbingers of Ashur as you fledglings call them, was born. Not an impressive title by any means, but it is not really all that important in the grand scheme of things if you think about it. You have probably never felt the twinges in your blood when something catastrophic happens. I'm not talking about your haven catching fire or discovering that the milk's gone off, but someone in your vampiric family dying. Those who have been blood-bond and possibly ghouls can feel when their master has been killed. I experienced something similar once, but that is a conversation for another time. It is like a part of you has died, or a piece of you is missing. You somehow know what has happened, even though you weren't necessarily there. When Cappadocius was diablerized by Augustus Giovanni, the entire clan felt this shunt in their body. They knew what happened, and those Lazarenes on the outside world would soon find out who performed this blasphemous act, and the promise the Giovanni and Camarilla formed. In short, it allowed the Giovanni to claim the mantle as the new clan of death, and allowed them to purge any other bloodline and clan they pleased. The Cappadocians, or whatever was left of them, sought permission to join the Camarilla, which would have saved them. I remember this well. The Bruja, Nosferatu, and Venture agreed, but the Toreadors, Tremere, Malkavians, and Gangrel denied their invitation. It was a great sadness to learn of this news, to see our former friends and allies being branded as monstrous beings to be destroyed by these insufferable, incestuous, pasta-eating fiends! Apologies, neonate. It is a decision that occasionally brings a great anger within me. The fall of Cappadocius was a shame and joy for the Harbingers. They had their vengeance denied by greedy usurpers, many of which debate the idea that the birth of the Giovanni clan and the fall of the Cappadocians was part of Cappadocius' plan. They despise the Giovanni for taking that vengeful murder away from them, not because they killed Cappadocius. Lazarus was forced to have the Harbingers retreat, with many ending any feuds, debts, and boons abruptly before the Harbingers performed a great exodus. Some would say they fled into Kaimalki, whilst others state that they entered the Shroud, whilst others say they hid elsewhere. The Cappadocians in Kaimalki would have felt this too, the shunt in their body when their antediluvian was eaten, amongst their own frenzied struggles within the prison made by Cappadocius, all the while coming up with a way for them to survive and not commit diablerie on each other. Through many rituals and botched attempts, these Cappadocians would learn how to enter the Shadowlands, the Shroud, to enter and feed upon the ghosts that resided there. The Shroud, similar to the Abyss, is not a place I would recommend going on your holiday. It is a horrifically frightening place to spend a night, let alone centuries. Swimming back and forth being abused by ghosts took a toll on their humanity and their mentality, the equivalent of a soldier coming back from a war with PTSD. In a way, that is exactly what it was. A war of the damned. It was probably during this point in their history where the importance of masks comes into their culture, something I believe they stole from the ghosts that live in the Shroud. Different masks are awarded to members of signs of status, roles and achievements, masks that range from simple death masks to colourful and ornate masks of Baroque grandeur, probably intended to be an acceptable dress for Elysium. Such masks are said to be decorated with jewels and paints that hints towards their past, or how many Giovanni they have slain, for example. It was almost a must for these Cappadocians and perhaps Harbingers of Skulls to recognise each other. They would spy beyond the veil, learning of many fiends as they watched over us in the mortal realm, the Skinlands. Eventually, a Cappadocian by the name of Capugin would come to them, offering guidance and passage out of the Shadowlands, granting them the title Harbinger of Skulls and a new purpose. It is this reason why I believe that this was Lazarus with a new mask all of his own. Although, I shall admit there is evidence to suggest the Capugin is not just one kindred. The Capugin may be Japheth, who has been a wraith for over 5 centuries since his incomplete diablerie, Bizarre, and Lazarus, so 3 in total. Some would also state that the Harbingers returned when the 6th Great Maelstrom that gave the Harbingers their freedom and the opportunity to take revenge on those who wronged them. What you choose to believe, however, is entirely down to you. Free from their imprisonment, the Harbingers of Ashur would make their mark on society. Those devout followers of Lazarus do not embrace until every Harbinger is pulled out of the Shadowlands, which I see as a rather pointless intervention, but I am not one to tell the kindred how they should or should not behave themselves, unless they are a Toreador or Anarch. Anyway, some of these newer Harbingers are thrown into the Shroud to know what their sires endured. All leave its tortured spirits, while some leave as spirits. Yes, You did hear that correctly. Some of these harbingers are actually wraiths in Cainite robes. Now you may laugh at the idea, think me mad, but I assure you, I speak the truth. I am many things, but mad I am not. Staying in the shroud removes part of your soul, and some lose more than they bargained for, returning as half kindred, half wraith, forgetting that they were kindred at all. These breeds of kindred naturally find it more difficult to acclimatize to the skinlands and are usually called risen. The vast majority of harbingers are not these, many of which do not listen to Lazarus' nonsense. Most would join the Sabbat, as their motives to wreak havoc on the new antediluvian, Augustus Giovanni, marries to that of the ideologies of the Sabbat quite nicely. That said, they shun social company, preferring to be left alone to study and follow through the plans against Giovanni and those who oppose the Harbingers. I understand they have, or had, an upper hand with the Setite anti-tribute in negotiations, for they remember how the ministry failed to protect them in their time of need. They appear to be on good standings with the La Sombra, as they both share an interest in exploring the natures of the Abyss, the Shroud, and they can cooperate with the Tzimisce more so than other clans, but who can honestly say they are friends of a Tzimisce? Do they even know what the word and concept even means? Some of these harbingers are part of the Tamehera, more interested in studying and exploring the underworld than revenge. These harbingers were said to be welcomed into Enoch as honoured guests, protecting it from the outside world. In more recent years, what is left of the Harbingers of Skulls and Cappadocians have formed as one clan again, which you tell me caused them to change their name to Harbinger of Ashur. During the last decade, the 2010s, I am told they launched an attack on the Giovanni's holdings in Venice, with the assistance of a number of young Giovanni that would act as a catalyst for the family reunion, where the clans of death would band together under a new title, Hecata. They also share the weakness of the Giovanni, where the kiss is more painful than it is orgasmic through some weird shit happening in the blood that we have already discussed about before. It may baffle you that the Cappadocians and the Harbingers of Skulls would form an alliance with each other and with the Giovanni after all that has transpired, but here is something for you to remember. No one knows what has happened to Augustus. Whether he is dead, diablerized, or is in hiding, no one is certain, but he is not with his clan anymore. So, who is acting as the clan's head? Well, I am glad you asked. It is Capuchin, the kindred who freed the Harbingers from the Kamalki prison, the one who saved the Cappadocians from Ashur's might. Whether he is one Cainite or several, he, or they, have become quite involved in guiding Clan Hecata, essentially acting as its de facto leader. His, or their, motives terribly unclear. Once more, the Harbingers of Skulls, the Cappadocians, the Harbingers of Ashur, whatever you wish to call them, rule the clans of death once more. If there was ever a moment to be wary of them, it would be now. For centuries, the Cappadocians were at the height of power, championed only by the Ventru, often serving the Ventru princes as their seneschals. They were bedfellows at the courts of their enemies, just so they could degrade them to ash. They were the skeletons to the body that is Cainite society and structure, in addition to the mucilage that held the flesh and bone together. When you think about it, it almost makes sense as to why the Ivory Tower was so keen on the destruction of these necromancers. Perhaps the Cappadocians had become too powerful. If you remember anything about our discussions of the vampiric bloodlines past, present and future, remember that vampires are paranoid, and do not forget. The Harbingers of Ashur and the rest of Clan Hecata have not forgotten the betrayal of the Camarilla, the betrayal of the Giovanni. The Cappadocians of old were genuinely kind and peaceful. The Harbingers of Skulls are anything but. The Harbingers of Ashur of new bury themselves in Giovanni households and Camarilla courts not to serve, but to crumble the foundations from the inside. Revenge is a succulent meal, neonate. One best served cold and dank. Like a corpse. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.